Welcome to Reading the Text. Every Monday, we're going to spend a few minutes reading the passage that I will preach from on the coming Sunday. The goal isn't to preach the sermon ahead of time. The goal is to slow down and learn how to read carefully and begin noticing things that we would usually go right past because we're reading too quickly. And this week, we're continuing our journey through the Old Testament book of Habakkuk. We're looking at chapter 1, verse 12 through chapter 2 and verse 4. And so let's read through it together and then we'll make some notes. Habakkuk begins, "Are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have ordained them as a judgment, and you, O Rock, have established them for reproof. You who are of purer eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong. Why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? You make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his dragnet, so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore, he sacrifices to his net and makes offerings to his dragnet, for by them he lives in luxury and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. And the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so he may run who reads it. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end, it will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come, it will not delay. Behold, his soul is puffed up, it is not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by his faith. Well, this past Sunday, when we looked at chapter 1, verses 1 through 11, what we noticed was that the chapter began with a complaint from Habakkuk. And so we have Habakkuk speaking, and that's what starts things out. And then we have God's response in the second part of the passage. And you'll notice in this passage, it largely follows the same pattern. Habakkuk speaks in verses 12 through 17. This is all Habakkuk here. And then he makes his resolution here in verse 1. And then when we come down to chapter 2 and verse 2, this is when the Lord responds. He says, "And the Lord answered me." And this is what God has to say to Habakkuk. And if you'll notice in verses 12 and 13, what Habakkuk does is he appeals to God's character. And it's almost like he's reminding himself who God is. Who is God? Look at how he talks to God and how he addresses God. "O Lord, my God, my Holy One." And he reminds himself we shall not die. And the reason he does that is because God had promised to protect and to look after his people. He goes on, he says, "You have ordained them as a judgment." Them there refers to Babylon. Remember, we saw that in the first sermon in the series, that God was raising up Babylon as a judgment against Judah. And you, O Rock, he's continuing, he's addressing God, but he's reminding himself what he knows is true. He says here, "O Lord, you have ordained them." Here he says, "You, O Rock, have established them for reproof." And look at these words here, reproof and judgment. And so we have these parallel concepts and these parallel words, these synonyms. He continues in verse 13, "You who are of purer eyes than to see evil." And of course, the meaning there is not that God can't see evil. The meaning there is that God is holy and he cannot be in an intimate relationship, a close relationship with evil. And he reinforces it here in the second part of the parallelism. You who are of pure eyes, than to see evil. And then he comes here and he says, and cannot look at wrong. And so we have these parallel statements here that reinforce the point that he's making. So verses 12 and 13, Habakkuk reminds himself of God's character, who God is. And then really the second part of verse 13, right here where he asks this question, why do you look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? Here Habakkuk is stating his dilemma. And so this is the dilemma that Habakkuk has. This is what he can't get past. How is it that this God here can come back and act like this? If God is really of purer eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong, then how can he idly look at traitors? How can you just watch this happening and it seems as though God is not doing anything? Remain silent when the wicked swallows up the righteous more than he. And he continues on in this same sort of train of thought. Nations are like defenseless fish, he writes here in verse 14, like fish of the sea, crawling things that have no ruler. Well, not having a ruler also means that they have no defense. So they're defenseless. He brings all of them, verse 15, up with a hook. Babylon catches all of these nations seemingly endlessly. That's who the he here is referring to the nation really of Babylon. The king, but the nation is who he's talking about. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his dragnet, and so he rejoices and is glad. So it's not just that Babylon is ruthless on the battlefield. The idea is this is what they live for. This is what drives them. This is what motivates them. This is what gets them going. And then watch this in verse 16. He sacrifices to his net and makes offerings to his dragnet, right? And so we have the idea of idolatry. We talked about that on Sunday also. And so we move from this description in verses 14 and 15 to idolatry, where Habakkuk names it what it is, description to idolatry. For by them, speak them here is a reference to the dragnet and the net. By them he lives in luxury and his food is rich. And so this has been very profitable for the king of Babylon. It's been very profitable for the nation of Babylon. And then all of that eventually culminates in verse 17 with this idea that there's no end in sight. Is he then to just keep on emptying his net, mercilessly killing nations forever? And so we move from description to idolatry, and then down to verse 17 to this unanswered question of how long is this going to go on? And so you come to chapter 2 and verse 1, and Habakkuk says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower. And so tower and watchpost, right? And look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. The reason you go into the watchtower is because the watchtower is elevated. Right? And so it gives you a different perspective. But the perspective here is not necessarily what's going to happen. The perspective here is to see what it is that God is going to say and how he's going to answer. And so in chapter 2 and verse 2, then we get the Lord's response. And God's answer is, number one, he says, write this down, make it plain, so that he may run who reads it. Make it plain, write it down. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Wait for it. It hastens to the end. The vision awaits its appointed time. And so here's the idea in verse 3. The idea is the answer is coming. So the answer will come. The reason will be made known. But as we saw on Sunday, that's not necessarily going to happen in Habakkuk's lifetime, but eventually it will come. And so the response then, or our task then, in light of all of this, is here. So write this down. It will be known. In the meantime, his soul, king of Babylon, right? So king of Babylon is puffed up. It is not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by his faith. And so what do we do in the meantime? We live by faith. We trust, right? We remind ourselves what we know is true. That's what Habakkuk does in the first part of the passage. So we remind ourselves what we know is true. So, God, I can't understand what you're doing. I can't understand how this is supposed to work. I can't understand what I'm going through, but here's what I do know. I do know that you are good, and I do know that you are holy, and I do know that you love me. And so I can rest in that, and I can trust in that. So Habakkuk lays this question before God. If you're holy, how can you use a nation more wicked than Judah to accomplish your purposes? And if you do, what does that say about your justice? And that's the problem, and that's the question we'll look at this coming Sunday as we continue looking at Habakkuk. See you then.